My dear brothers and sisters, in Islam, after what I hope was a very enjoyable Eid holiday for each and every one of you, I'd like to get back to talking about the story of the Prophet ﷺ. And the last time we were talking about his life, it had to do a lot with people converting to Islam, essentially waking up from the slumber of ignorance and heedlessness. And as the message of Islam spread, and more people started to wake up, that alarming message, the Prophet ﷺ opening, if you will, saying that أَنَا نَذِيرٌ لَكُمْ بَيْنَ يَدَيْ عَذَابٍ شَدِيدٍ, that I am a warner to you, come to warn you of a terrible punishment. If you remember, that was the alarming call that he made to his people. And as this spread, the Quraysh, the idolaters, we could say the establishment at the time, became more and more concerned. With every new convert to Islam, they were becoming worried. And this was especially true when Hamza embraced Islam. And this happened around the second year of the mission. The conversion of Hamza to Islam was considered an amazing win for the Muslim community. You know, the Muslim community, there were a few exceptional people in that community in terms of their social status. But many of the early converts to Islam, they were poor. They were not influential. They were weak within the Meccan society. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is later on down the road. And so when Hamza embraced Islam, it brought honor and dignity, and it brought strength to this very young community. And it happened, it's a very funny story, or I should say a very ironic story, because it happened at the hands, or the catalyst was at the hands of one of the most openly opposing enemies of the Prophet ﷺ. And this was one day when the Prophet ﷺ was sitting by the gate of Safa, outside of the haram, outside of the masjid, I should say, outside of the sanctuary. If you can imagine, there's Safa and Marwa, and Safa, there's a gate there which is right next to the mountain, and that's where people would come into the masjid to perform their rites of Hajj and of Umrah. They'd make tawaf, etc. That's where they'd come in. And so the Prophet ﷺ was sitting there, and one of the Meccans, they approached the Prophet ﷺ. His name was Amr ibn Hisham ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi. Amr ibn Hisham. He came to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, at that time, he was, of course, he was the nephew of Walid, who was the leader of the Makhzumi clan. Walid was the leader, and the Makhzumi tribe, or I should say clan, was superior, dominant, and they were also spearheading the campaign against the Prophet ﷺ. And Amr believed that he would follow in the footsteps of his uncle and would rise to leadership. He was confident in that. His people revered him because he was, it's like this dichotomy of an existence. He was extremely generous and hospitable to guests, in particular the pilgrims. That he was a wealthy person, successful, and he would spend of his money in hospitality, taking care of those that would visit the house of Allah. And that was a huge deal. It was a big honor. And he was able to capitalize on that because of his wealth. However, he was a very, very vile person in many other ways. He was very ferocious when it came to seeking revenge against his detractors. If someone would stand up against him or disapprove of what he was doing, he would literally stomp them out. So you have this very hospitable person, while at the same time can give in to these violent, egotistical tendencies. So when he passed by the Prophet ﷺ, and so far things have been going okay. I mean, in the context of the early mission, the Prophet ﷺ was kind of back and forth with them, and at times would appear to have won a few arguments or, overcome them with some of the verses of the Quran. And so Amr ibn Hisham, he responded to this that day, stopping by the Prophet ﷺ, and he laid into the Prophet ﷺ, calling him names, abusing him. This is all verbal, of course. And it was equivalent to what we would call ripping him a new one. That's what happened. And then the Prophet ﷺ sat there silently. He didn't say a word. And then Amr, he caught up with his friends next to the Kaaba. His, circle of peers. Amr ibn Hisham, if you don't recognize, he was known by his peers as Abu al-Hakam, and would be quickly known by the Muslims as Abu Jahl. I'm sure you've heard that name before. Abu Jahl. He was called Abu al-Hakam, like the wise one, and Abu Jahl meaning the ignorant one. And that's what the Muslims came to call him, as Abu Jahl, one of the great enemies of Islam. So this incident would have gone unnoticed if it hadn't been witnessed by a freed woman of Abdullah ibn Jud'an. Abdullah ibn Jud'an, you should recognize that. We talked about his role in Meccan society. He had, of course, passed away by this time, but was the primary player in the Pact of Chivalry. It was called Hilf al-Fudul, which was the time when one of the visitors of the city was doing business and was taken advantage of, and he brought it to the attention of the Quraysh, and the leaders of the community decided to stand up for those that do not have power and might in their own community, just for the sake of fairness. And the Prophet ﷺ took part in that pact. And he said that he would be honored to do something similar even after Islam. And so this woman, who was a freed woman of Abdullah ibn Jud'an, who had a soft spot for the Prophet ﷺ and for his mission. When the Prophet ﷺ got up, and you could see that he was kind of worn out by the abuse that he took, and he went back home, Hamza, who was his uncle and brother by way of nursing, came around the corner. And he was outfitted as if he was out in the Badia, out in the wilderness. And she came up to Hamza and she told him, radiallahu anhu, she told him what had transpired. That, look, your nephew was just verbally abused by Abu al-Hakam, Amr ibn Hisham. And so Hamza, he took off straight to the Kaaba, went to the circle of the idolaters, identified Abu al-Hakam, removed the bow from his back, which he had it slung around his shoulder, and raised it above his head, and with all of his might, he struck Abu Jahl. Basically, in retribution. He struck him with all of his might. Hamza was a big man. He was big, was physically strong, and was feared. And Abu Jahl looked, of course, and Hamza, he said, and this is the irony of it, because he wasn't a Muslim at the time, but it was right here that he embraced Islam. He said, do you have words for me now that I follow Muhammad? I've embraced his religion. Do you have some words for me? Meaning, you just verbally abused my nephew. You want to share those same words after I just cracked you on your back with this bow? We can have it out right now. And his companions, Abu Jahl, they tried to get up. Abu Jahl stopped them. He said, look, it's a fair exchange. I just abused his nephew right around the corner. You didn't see that. He didn't want to test Hamza. He didn't want to get up and have it go blow for blow, because more than likely, Hamza would have been victorious. So, this was the story of Hamza, very early on in the beginning of the mission. And like that that exchange, what transpired, transformation of life, of faith for Hamza, many other people began to listen to the Prophet ﷺ. And while Islam spread, the idolaters began to unify. There's multiple clans within the tribe of Quraysh that are all there. And those that are comfortable with the status quo are now getting worried because it's starting to catch on. You know, when the Prophet ﷺ was telling them, look, you're idolaters, this is kufr, this disbelief. You know, some of your actions are vile, they're repugnant, they're sinful, they're wrong, has to be changed. And so people that are happy with the status quo, they don't want to see change. They'll do anything to prevent change. There's all types of tactics and strategies from outside and from within that they will employ to stop change, especially change for God. And because the Prophet ﷺ, his community was young and it was still small and it was still weak, even though they had Hamza and shortly thereafter they would have Umar ibn al-Khattab, they just didn't have the numbers or the strength to be able to stand up and make those changes. But they needed to be fortified because of all of the efforts that the Quraysh were going to make. Not only physical abuse, but it would also be mental. It would be financial. They would use every strategy in the book. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he needed to fortify their faith and strengthen them as a small community. And this was done by teaching faith, worshiping Allah, and strengthening their community bonds as a collective. Three things the Prophet ﷺ set out to do. And this all kind of came together in the house of Abu Abdullah, Abdu Manaf, Ibn Asad, Ibn Abdullah, Ibn Umar, Ibn Makhzum. This was one of the Muslims from the Makhzumi clan. If you remember, Abu Jahl is from the Makhzumi clan as well. And the Makhzumi clan were the ones spearheading the campaign against the Prophet ﷺ. And Abdu Manaf, who, by the way, would later be known as Al-Arqam ibn Abi al-Arqam. He was a young man at the time. And he hid his Islam. His house was located at Safa, the Mount of Safa, but it was opposite of the Kaaba. So it was kind of hidden from the public eye. And so he offered his house to the Prophet ﷺ. He offered his house so the Prophet ﷺ could use that space because they didn't have a space of their own. They didn't have an adequate space of their own where they would be safe from the outside world, comfortable to do what needed to be done. And the beauty of Al-Arqam, his plan was that because his house was outside of public view, also he was hiding his Islam, and the fact that he was Makhzumi was in his favor because no one would assume that a young Makhzumi man, with all that was going on, would embrace Islam. But he did. And so they would never suspect that the Prophet ﷺ was in his home, nor all of the young Muslims that were there, and the weak Muslims that were looking for strength of faith. And so when the home was opened, the Prophet ﷺ began teaching and established congregational prayer. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ was sent to do. He was sent to teach, to spread the message of Islam and to purify the hearts of the believers. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَإِن كَانُوا مِن قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. He says, it is He, meaning it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has sent among the unlettered, this is the Arab, He sent among the unlettered a messenger from themselves. They were not all illiterate, but most of them were, as was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sent them a messenger from themselves, reciting to them his verses and purifying them and teaching them the book and wisdom, teaching them the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although they were before in clear, manifest error. Surah Al-Jumu'ah, verse number 2. The Prophet ﷺ, he needed a safe space. He needed a safe place to secure the faith of his followers. He needed a place to share Allah's words, to teach them about their Maker and their Lord. He needed them to know without a doubt that there was none worthy of worship except Allah. He needed them to embrace La ilaha illallah. Now, to many of us, that just comes natural. Those are the first words we heard when we came into the world, as our father called the adhan in our ear. And inshallah, they'll be the last words that we utter when someone's doing a talqeen. They're instructing us to say La ilaha illallah. For many of us, we grew up learning La ilaha illallah. But guess what? For the Meccan society, no. It's not commonplace. It was Lat and Uzza and Manat and Hubal, etc. They had all of these idols that they had deviated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a profound way that they gave into idolatry. Over 300 and some idols were there around and filling the Kaaba. So La ilaha illallah was a revival of the Abrahamic faith that they had lost. And this is what he needed to secure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in Surah Muhammad, think about that. فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ مُتَقَلَّبَكُمْ وَمَثْوَاكُمْ. So know, O Muhammad, that there is no deity except Allah. There is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanding here, فَاعْلَمْ, know first. Gain the knowledge first. Understand that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and ask forgiveness for your sins and for the believing men and believing women. And Allah knows of your movements and your resting place. The only road to knowledge is learning. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-ilmu bit-ta'allum, that knowledge comes by way of acquisition of knowledge, of learning. And so for that reason, the Prophet ﷺ opened that school, if you will, the first institution of education, of formal learning. And the companions, they would all gather there, and they would gather to learn, and they would also gather for worship. He taught them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in return, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthened their resolve when they needed it most. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ وَيُضِلُّ اللَّهُ الظَّالِمِينَ وَيَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Allah keeps firm those who believe with a firm word. What's the firm word? La ilaha illallah. Allah keeps firm those who believe with a firm word. La ilaha illallah. Some of the great scholars of tafsir, they say that this is talking about La ilaha illallah, learning that in this life. Learning that in this life, he says, fil hayat dunya wa fil akhirah, so that you're firm in faith now while you're living, and so that in the hereafter, when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be successful. You'll be firm in your belief when you're standing in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so this is what the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was after. He said, and Allah sends astray the wrongdoers, and Allah does what He wills. About this word, this kalima, la ilaha illallah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, alaykum bi la ilaha illallah wal istighfar. Has much to do with this verse. He says, essentially, cling to la ilaha illallah. Right? Hold on to that word, and hold on to seeking Allah's forgiveness. He says, employ them abundantly, for Iblis said, here's our open enemy, right? So when Iblis is going to confess something, you know, we need to listen here. Iblis, he said, أهلكت الناس بالذنوب. I will destroy people with their sins. That's how Iblis will get you. I will destroy them with their sins. وأهلكوني بلا إله إلا الله والاستغفار. But in turn, they will destroy and defeat me when they say La ilaha illallah and they seek Allah's forgiveness. He says, فَلَمَّا رَأَيْتُ ذَلِكَ أَهْلَكْتُهُمْ بِالْأَهْوَاءِ. When I saw them do that, they held on to La ilaha illallah, and they sought forgiveness of their sins, I destroyed them with their desires. فَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. They thought that they were going on the straight way. They thought that they were guided. Meaning that if Iblis can't divert you from the most manifest sign of faith, La ilaha illallah, and then when you stumble and you fall and you sin, you seek Allah's pardon, then Iblis will come and he will try and get you to deviate. You know, reject true, authentic guidance. For some, deviation. This is a challenge for our communities here and around the globe today. You know, Islam is, I should say, the Muslim community is being challenged ideologically. What it is that we believe. You know, there's a lot of conversation going on. I don't like this. I don't like this rule, this law. Doesn't make sense to me. You know, we're people of intellect and science, and things should add up. The equation should be, as we define it, bound by parameters of the world. If it doesn't, it's just not true. It's hocus pocus stuff, you know. Angels and jinn and unseen things and hellfire, and we're being challenged in that way. Or a person gives in to their desires. It's not timely. These laws and these rules, it's not timely. I'm busy doing something else. I don't agree with it because it just doesn't fit into my life. It's too challenging perhaps, and so we try and alter in order to justify our behavior. Try and alter, and we look for concessions and excuses. We end up with a different presentation of faith, some newfangled understanding. And this is how Shaitan will destroy the Muslim. If sinning is not working because they keep repenting, then I'll get them to sin and think that they're not sinning by having them redefine Islam, redefine guidance. This is what Shaitan, he said. أَهْلَكْتُهُمْ بِالْأَهْوَاءِ فَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. I'll destroy them with their desires so that they think that they are guided. And as a result, the blessing of authentic guidance is rejected. You turn away from that. And while you think you're guided, you found some newfangled interpretation of Islam. And you're just making things up as you go along. And Shaitan, what happens is he puts another point on the board. Right? He puts a point on the board for evil. So look at this, the next couple of verses. This is very interesting because we go back to the Quraysh. It's very applicable. I mean, the story of man doesn't change greatly over time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ بَدَّلُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ كُفْرًا وَأَحَلُّوا قَوْمَهُمْ دَارَ الْبَوَارِ. It says, have you not considered those who exchanged the favor of Allah for disbelief and settled their people in the home of ruin? أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ بَدَّلُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ كُفْرًا وَأَحَلُّوا قَوْمَهُمْ دَارَ الْبَوَارِ. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the Quraysh, the idolaters. The ni'mah, the blessing, the favor of Allah that they exchanged was the favor of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. They didn't want the favor of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to guide them, came to direct them to salvation. They didn't want that favor, but they wanted to be ruined. They wanted to stay the course, the status quo. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Jahannama, yaslawnaha bi'sal qarar. Says it is hell which they will enter to burn, and wretched is the settlement. Such a settlement. It says, وَجَعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا لِيُضِلُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ قُلْ تَمَتَّعُوا فَإِنَّ مَصِيرَكُمْ إِلَى النَّارِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends this. This is in Surah Ibrahim. It's a couple of verses. And they have attributed to Allah equals, meaning they set up false gods with Allah to mislead people from His way. Say, enjoy yourselves. Enjoy yourselves with what it is that you're doing. Abandoning Allah, enjoy that now. Live your best life now. For indeed, your destination is the fire. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضاه ونصلي ونسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Brothers, if you don't mind, scoot up a little bit. We're starting to fill up there in the back. Don't make yourself uncomfortable. Just fill in the spaces. When we take a look at this institute, Darul Arqam, space dedicated to Islam, a place of learning, not only did it serve as a place of learning, but it was also a place for communal worship. Teaching faith, worshiping God. It was in this house that they first established congregational prayer on a regular basis. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Salatul Jama'ah afdalu min Salatul Fadhi bi 27 daraja. That the congregational prayer performed in congregation is more rewarding or is better than praying alone by 27 degrees. It's 27 times better than praying by yourself is praying in congregation. And the benefits of congregational prayer, they are many. And I want to focus on two. The first of those is that it strengthens faith. Prayer in general, whether alone or in congregation, prayer increases faith. It strengthens and fortifies faith, and that's exactly what the community needed. And that's exactly what our communities still need. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. The believers are those who, when Allah is mentioned, their hearts become fearful. Their hearts become fearful when Allah is mentioned. Some of us, our hearts become fearful when our fathers are mentioned. Not like you're afraid from a snake bite, but out of reverence, of deep-rooted respect. It's like, oh, we need to stand up a little taller. We need to, act a little better. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name is mentioned, their hearts are filled with this feeling of reverential fear. And when His verses are recited, which happens in prayer all of the time, it increases them in faith, and upon their Lord they rely. الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. Those who establish prayer, and from what we have provided them they spend. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ حَقًّا. These are the true believers. لَهُمْ دَرَجَاتٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ وَمَغْفِرَةٌ وَرِزْقٌ كَرِيمٌ. He says, for them they have lofty stations, high positions with their Lord, and forgiveness and noble provision. This is one of the benefits of prayer, congregational prayer included, is that it increases your faith, it strengthens your faith. If you're worried about your iman, here you go right here. The second benefit, and this is where I want you to pay close attention. The second benefit that we find in Darul Arqam, of that congregation, of that community, who came together to learn together, who came together to pray together. But congregation also allows you to come together to be together. To be together. The class time, the learning time is great. The prayer time, standing in prayer is great. But the time before it and the time after it is also precious. When you get to interact with each other, when you get to come to know one another, get to check on each other. How are you doing? How is your health? How is your family? What's going on in your life? You get to create bonds. And not with anyone. It's not just anyone that you're creating a relationship with, but it is faith-minded people. Faith-minded people, when you are in a community of godless people, is absolutely precious. There's no price that can be put on it. And so praying together increases the opportunity to be around like-minded people, people who love Allah, people who follow His messenger. And while those people may not be perfect, people that love Allah and love His messenger, they're not perfect. You can't hold them to a divine standard. Those are very human people. But they're the best we have. Those are the best that we have. And in our context, we have to try our very best to make wholesome environments for ourselves and for our families, for our children. Think about the environment and who you spend time with. The environment that you are in and who you spend most of your time with. Do they have a positive impact on you and on your faith, or is it a negative impact? If you don't know how to assess that, I want you to think about it right now. There's a couple of questions to get you started. If you don't know how to assess your environment and your circle of friends, think about this. Number one, do they remind you of Allah? Or are they fixated on the dunya? When you're in conversation, does Allah come up? Is Allah's name mentioned so that feeling can come into your heart? Or is it only about worldly matters that you talk and converse? Do they encourage you to pray and live a righteous life? Or do they abandon prayer and mock religion? Do they seek authentic guidance from the Prophet ﷺ and the great scholars of our tradition? Or do they believe Islam needs reform to fit into today's society? When you're falling into sin and error, do they try and help you out of it? Or are they helping you justify it? You're all good, it's cool, take it easy, don't be hard on yourself, no problem. Or are they telling you, look, you got to fix up, this isn't right? Those are a couple of questions to assess your environment, to assess the people around you. You know, sometimes we just think that applies only to children. It only applies to our kids. We ask our kids, who's your friend and what are they doing? And we get to know them a little bit and say, I don't like you hanging out with him or her. It's a bad influence on you. While at the same time, we're not checking our influences. We're not assessing our own influences, because it doesn't matter if you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. No one is above influence. If all you do all day long is talk about the stock market, eventually you're going to want to invest in the stock market. If all you do all day long is talk about Allah, you're going to want to be with Allah. We have to pick that environment. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ar-rajulu ala dini khalili." That a person is upon the way of their friend. فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلْ. So take a close look at who you take as your friends. And so one of the great Imams, Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin, gave some extremely wise instruction. He said, disassociate yourself from the people of frivolousness, those who constantly busy themselves with hearsay. Distance yourself from the people of vice and wickedness, sin. They have no favorable ambitions, nor do they manifest a single sign of taqwa. Flee from this type of person like you would run from a lion that's chasing you down, while at the same time being good to them. Treat them well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجَرًا جَمِيلًا. Avoid them in a gracious way. He says, you must befriend those who are pious and scrupulous in their speech, in their food, their dress code. Stick to the people of proper manners, goodness, regardless their social classes, regardless rich or poor, black or white, regardless of their mother tongue or their place of origin. Stick with those that are well versed in the sciences of Islamic law. Stick with those that are impoverished, the needy, the spiritual wayfarers of Orthodox Islam that are knowledgeable of the Prophet's sayings and traditions. This is what our Prophet ﷺ did for his community. And it's what we need to do for ours. He taught faith, worshipped Allah, and doing so strengthened community. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our hearts to that which He loves and is pleased with, that He show us the truth and bless us to follow it, that He show us falsehood and bless us to steer clear of it. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us safe, that He grant us health and wealth so long as it is good for us. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.